The porcelain cup shattered against the checkerboard tile with a crack that could have been a gunshot. For a heartbeat, the entire Paradise Diner went silent, forks frozen halfway to mouths, the jukebox cutting out between Johnny Cash and Patsy Cline, even the sizzle of the griddle seeming to hold its breath. Then came the scream. Not loud, worse than loud. It was the kind of scream that started in the throat and died before it reached the air, the sound of a woman who'd learned long ago that making noise only made things worse. Linda Hargrove stood there in the center aisle, coffee dripping from her auburn hair, down the collar of her pale yellow blouse, pooling in the fabric at her chest. Her hands were up, palms out, as if she could still catch the liquid that had already scalded her. The skin on her left cheek was turning pink. Her husband, Richard Hargrove III, according to the gold-embossed business cards he handed out like salvation, stood over her with his arms still extended, his Italian leather shoes planted wide, his Brooks Brothers suit somehow untouched by the chaos he'd just created. The empty cup lay in 3 pieces at his feet. "I told you," he said, his voice carrying the kind of casual cruelty that only came from decades of never being told no. "I wanted it black. Not this watered-down swill. Are you deaf or just stupid?" The diner was the nicest establishment in Mercer County, if you could call any place with vinyl booths and laminate tables nice. It sat on the corner of Route 9 and Hickory Street, brick facade painted white, big windows looking out onto the Texaco station across the road. Inside, the air conditioning hummed against the August heat, and the smell of frying bacon mixed with the ghost of 1,000 cigarettes smoked before the health nuts started complaining. It was 1971. Nixon was on the television every night, lying through his teeth. The war was still chewing up boys and spitting them back broken. Gas was 36 cents a gallon, and a man could still slap his wife in public and expect people to look the other way. Except Sheriff Tom Miller was sitting in booth 7. He'd been there since 6:30 that morning, same as every Thursday, working his way through a stack of buckwheat pancakes and reading the county reports. The booth had a clear sightline to the door, old habit from Korea, where not watching your six could get you a bayonet in the kidney. He was 52 years old, built like a man who'd spent his youth digging foxholes and his middle age hauling drunk drivers out of ditches. His uniform was beige, sharply creased, the star on his chest polished to a mirror shine. His patrol car, a 1970 Dodge Polara with a 440 Magnum under the hood, sat outside with the engine ticking as it cooled. He'd watched the whole thing unfold. He'd seen Richard Hargrove pull up 20 minutes earlier in a 1971 Cadillac Eldorado, butterscotch yellow with a white vinyl top, the kind of car that screamed, "I've got money, and I want you to know it." The man had opened the driver's door and stepped out without bothering to walk around and open his wife's. She'd climbed out on her own, smoothing down the skirt of her dress, checking her makeup in the side mirror like she was preparing for an inspection. They'd come inside. Richard had ordered coffee, black, and a Denver omelet. Linda had ordered nothing, just sat with her hands folded in her lap, looking at the table like she was reading tea leaves. When the waitress, Jolene, 60 years old, varicose veins and a smoker's cough, brought the coffee, Richard had taken one sip, grimaced, and shoved the cup back across the table. "This tastes like dishwater," he'd said. Jolene had apologized, offered to brew a fresh pot, but Richard was already winding up, the way a pitcher winds up before he throws a fastball at somebody's head. His voice had gotten louder. Other diners had started glancing over. Linda had whispered something, probably "Please, Richard, not here," and that had been the spark. He'd grabbed the cup, stood up, and thrown it. Now Sheriff Miller set down his fork, wiped his mouth with a paper napkin, and slid out of the booth. His boots, black leather, steel-toed, polished every Sunday after church, made no sound on the tile as he crossed the diner. He moved with the deliberate economy of a man who'd learned that violence, when it came fast, and you didn't waste steps. Richard Hargrove didn't notice him until the sheriff was 3 feet away. "Sir," Miller said. His voice was flat, Midwestern, the kind of voice that didn't need to be loud to carry weight. "I'm going to need you to step outside." Richard turned. His face was flushed, whether from anger or the 2 whiskeys he'd had at breakfast was anybody's guess. He looked the sheriff up and down, taking in the uniform, the badge, the .38 special writing low on the hip. "I don't think so," Richard said. He pulled a wallet from his jacket, flipped it open to show a wad of bills thick enough to choke a horse. "I'm a customer. I have every right to expect decent service. If this woman," he gestured at Linda without looking at her, "can't follow a simple instruction, that's not my problem." Miller didn't look at the money. He'd seen men wave cash before, like it was a magic wand that could make consequences disappear. It never worked, not in his county. "Step outside," Miller repeated, "or I'll walk you out, your choice." For a moment, Richard considered it. You could see the calculus happening behind his eyes, the cost-benefit analysis of making a scene versus complying. He was used to being the biggest dog in the room. Used to secretaries scurrying when he snapped his fingers, used to maitre d's bowing and scraping. But this was Mercer County, not Manhattan, and the man in the beige uniform didn't look like he bowed to anyone. Richard's jaw tightened. He glanced around the diner, at the truckers in their denim and flannel, at the farmers with dirt under their nails, at Jeline standing by the coffee station with a pot in one hand and a rag in the other. Everyone was watching. "Fine," Richard said. He straightened his tie, shot his cuffs. "But you're going to regret this, Sheriff. I have friends in the state capitol. One phone call, and you'll be directing traffic in some backwater." "Outside," Miller said. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. Richard walked. Miller followed, close enough that Richard could probably feel the heat coming off the sheriff's body, close enough to grab him if he bolted. Not that he would. Men like Richard Hargrove didn't run. Running was for people who thought they could be caught. The door swung open, letting in a blast of August heat that hit like a wall. Outside, the asphalt shimmered, heat waves rising off the parking lot. The Texaco sign across the street blinked lazily, gas 36 cents gal, and a semi rumbled past on Route 9, Jake brake growling. Miller walked Richard over to the Cadillac, the yellow paint so bright it hurt to look at in the midday sun. He leaned against the hood, arms crossed, and waited. Richard turned, squaring up like this was a negotiation. "Look, Sheriff, I think we got off on the wrong foot. I'm a businessman. I understand how things work in small towns. If there's a civic fund or something that needs a donation." "Turn around," Miller said. "Excuse me." "Turn around, hands on the car." Richard's face went from pink to red. "Are you arresting me? For what? I didn't break any laws. That woman is my wife. What happens between a man and his wife?" Miller moved. He didn't grab Richard by the collar or shove him against the car. He just stepped forward, closing the distance, and Richard stumbled backward until his spine hit the Cadillac's door. Up close, the sheriff smelled like Old Spice and black coffee and something else, something Richard couldn't name. The scent of a man who'd seen the worst the world had to offer and walked out the other side. "Let me explain something to you, Mr. Hargrove," Miller said quietly. "In my county, we have rules. They're simple rules. Don't steal. Don't lie. Don't hurt people weaker than you. You just broke the third one." She's a human being," Miller cut him off. "And you assaulted her, in public, in front of 24 witnesses." He paused, let that sink in. "Now, I could haul you in right now, book you for assault and battery. You'd make bail, sure, but the arraignment's not till Monday, and the county jail doesn't have air conditioning. Bunks are steel. Mattresses are about an inch thick. Toilets don't flush half the time." He tilted his head, "Or we can handle this different." Richard swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbed. "What do you mean different?" Miller straightened, stepped back, gave Richard room to breathe. "You go back inside, you apologize to your wife, you apologize to Jeline, and then you clean up the mess you made. I'll pay for—" "Not with money," Miller said, "with your hands." Richard blinked. "What?" "You heard me. You get down on your knees and you pick up every piece of that cup. You mop up that coffee. You do it yourself in front of everyone who watched you throw it. And then maybe, I'll let you walk out of here without handcuffs." Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. That's humiliating." "Yeah," Miller said. "It is. Now imagine how your wife felt when you threw hot coffee on her in front of all those people. Imagine what that was like for her." For a long moment, they stood there in the parking lot, the sun beating down, the heat shimmering off the asphalt. A crow cawed from somewhere nearby. A car honked on Route 9. Then Richard looked away. His shoulders sagged. When he spoke, his voice was smaller, quieter. "And if I do this, you'll let me go." Miller considered. "If you do it right, if you mean it, and if your wife says she's okay with you leaving." He paused. "But here's the thing, Mr. Hargrove. If I ever hear about you laying a hand on her again, if I hear you so much as raised your voice to her, I will come find you. And next time there won't be any choices. Understand?" Richard nodded. He looked broken. Smaller somehow, like the air had been let out of him. "Good," Miller said. "Let's go." They walked back into the diner together. The air conditioning felt like stepping into a walk-in freezer after the heat outside. Every head turned as they came through the door. The jukebox had started up again, Merle Haggard now, singing about Mama Tried, but it might as well have been silence for all the attention anyone paid to it. Linda was still sitting in the booth, but someone had brought her a towel and a glass of water. Jeline stood beside her, one weathered hand resting on Linda's shoulder. The older woman's face was hard as flint, her eyes tracking Richard like a hawk watching a snake. Richard walked over. His Italian leather shoes clicked on the tile. He stopped a few feet from the booth, like he was afraid to get too close. "Linda," he said, his voice cracked. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that, it was wrong." Linda looked up at him. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying anymore. She didn't say anything. Just looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time, really seeing him, seeing past the suits and the money and the charm to the scared, angry man underneath. Richard turned to Jeline. "Ma'am, I apologize for my behavior. It was inexcusable." Jeline's expression didn't soften. "Apology noted," she said, her voice like gravel. "Now clean up your mess." She handed him a mop and a dustpan. Richard took them, his hands shaking slightly. Then he got down on his knees, his expensive suit pants touching the diner floor, and started picking up the pieces of the shattered cup. The diner watched in absolute silence. A truck driver in a John Deere cap chewed his toast slowly. A waitress refilling water glasses stopped mid-pour. Even the cook, visible through the serving window, had turned away from the griddle to watch. Richard worked methodically, picking up each shard, dropping them into the dustpan with tiny clinks. Then he took the mop, dipped it in the bucket Jeline had brought, and cleaned the coffee stains from the floor. His face was red, sweat beaded on his forehead, but he did it. When he was finished, he stood, holding the mop and dustpan like they were foreign objects. He looked at Miller, a question in his eyes. Miller nodded toward Linda. "Ask her." Richard turned back to his wife. "Linda, can I go?" Linda sat very still for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "Yes, you can go." Richard nodded. He set down the mop and dustpan, started to turn toward the door. Then he stopped, looked back at her one more time. "Are you coming?" "No," Linda said, "I'm not." Something flickered across Richard's face, surprise, maybe, or hurt, but he didn't argue. He just nodded again, adjusted his tie, and walked out of the diner. The door swung shut behind him with a soft chime. Through the window, they watched him get into the Cadillac. The engine roared to life. The car pulled out of the parking lot, tires crunching on gravel, and then it was gone, disappearing down Route 9 in a flash of butterscotch yellow. The diner let out a collective breath. Conversations started up again, low at first, then growing louder. Forks clinked against plates. The jukebox cycled to the next song. Life resumed. Miller walked over to Linda's booth and sat down across from her. Jeline brought him a fresh cup of coffee without being asked. "You okay?" Miller asked. Linda wrapped her hands around the water glass. They were trembling. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I don't know what I am." Miller nodded. He understood. He'd seen it before in Korea. That moment right after the shooting stopped, when the adrenaline drained away and left you hollow and shaking, not sure if you were alive or dead or something in between. "You got family in town?" he asked. "Someone you can stay with?" Linda shook her head. "My parents are in Florida, Richard's family, they wouldn't," she trailed off, staring at the table. "Okay," Miller said. "Okay, listen. There's a women's shelter over in Clayton, about 40 minutes from here. They have beds, counselors, people who can help. I can drive you there right now if you want. Or if you'd rather, First Methodist has a guest room. Pastor Williams is a good man. He'd put you up, no questions asked." Linda looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. Why are you doing this? Miller took a sip of his coffee. It was hot, strong, perfect. Because it's my job, he said simply, and because nobody should have to go through what you just went through. Linda's eyes filled with tears again, but she blinked them back. He's going to be so angry when he realizes what I've done, when he realizes I'm not coming back. Maybe, Miller said, but he's going to have to deal with that anger somewhere else. Not here, not with you. He pulled a business card from his pocket, slid it across the table. That's my office number. You call me if he shows up, if he tries to contact you, if anything happens, day or night. Understand? Linda took the card, held it like it was something precious. Okay, she whispered. Miller finished his coffee, left a few bills on the table, enough to cover Linda's meal too, and a generous tip for Jeline. Then he stood, adjusted his gun belt, and tipped his hat to Linda. You take care of yourself, Mrs. Hargrove, he said. Linda, she said, just Linda. Miller smiled, Linda then. He walked out into the August heat, climbed into the Polera, and sat there for a moment with the engine idling, letting the air conditioning kick in. Through the diner window, he could see Linda talking to Jeline, the older woman's arm around her shoulders. Then he put the car in gear and pulled out onto Route 9, headed back toward town, toward the sheriff's office and the paperwork that would follow this morning's events. But he didn't go straight there. Instead, he made a detour, pulling into the parking lot of First Methodist Church. Pastor Williams was in his office, going over Sunday's sermon. He looked up when Miller knocked on the doorframe. Tom, Williams said, surprised. Everything okay? Need a favor, Miller said. He explained the situation briefly, without unnecessary details. Williams listened, his expression growing more serious. Of course, Williams said when Miller finished. The guest room's always available. Tell her to come by any time, and Tom, you did the right thing. Miller nodded his thanks and left. He made one more stop, the women's shelter in Clayton, where he spoke to the director, a no-nonsense woman named Margaret who'd been running the place for 15 years. She took down Linda's information, promised to have a bed ready if needed. By the time Miller made it back to the sheriff's office, it was past noon. The building was a squat brick structure on Main Street, with bars on the windows and a flagpole out front. Inside, it smelled like old coffee and floor wax. Deputy Reese was at the front desk, filling out forms. He was 26 years old, fresh out of the Army, still getting used to the idea that law enforcement in Mercer County was more about helping people than shooting them. Sheriff, Reese said, looking up. Got a call from the state police about 15 minutes ago. Some businessman named Hargrove claims you threatened him, demanded he perform manual labor as punishment. Says he's filing a complaint. Miller hung his hat on the rack by the door. That right? Yes, sir. What do you want me to tell them? Miller walked to the coffee pot, poured himself a cup. It was thick as motor oil, bitter as regret. Perfect. Tell them the truth. Mr. Hargrove assaulted his wife in the Paradise Diner, multiple witnesses. I gave him a choice, clean up his mess or get arrested. He chose to clean up his mess. Reese grinned. They're not going to like that. Don't much care what they like, Miller said. We have laws here, he broke them, end of story. Want me to write up a report? Already did it, Miller said. He pulled the folded papers from his pocket, dropped them on Reese's desk. File it, and if Mr. Hargrove wants to press charges or file a complaint, tell him he's welcome to do so. But remind him that assault and battery is a crime, and we have 20+ witnesses. Reese picked up the report, scanned it. Think he'll come back. Miller thought about Richard Hargrove's face as he'd mopped that floor, the way his hands had shaken, the way he'd looked smaller somehow. No, he said finally. I don't think he will. Men like him don't like being humiliated. He'll stay away if only to save face. And Mrs. Hargrove. She's got options now, Pastor Williams and the Clayton shelter. It's up to her what she does next. Miller sat down at his desk, the old chair creaking under his weight. Best we can do is make sure she knows she has choices. The rest is up to her. Reese nodded, went back to his paperwork. Miller stared out the window at Main Street, at the hardware store, the barber shop, the people going about their daily business. Normal life in a small town. Except it wasn't normal, not really. Behind every closed door, inside every quiet house, there were stories like Linda Hargrove's. People suffering in silence. people who'd learned to flinch, people who thought they deserved it. Miller's job was to stand between them and the people who hurt them. Some days he succeeded. Some days he didn't, but he kept trying because that was all anyone could do. The phone rang. Reese answered it, listened, then held out the receiver. "Sheriff, it's for you, Richard Hargrove." Miller took the phone, leaned back in his chair. "Sheriff Miller." Richard's voice came through the line, tight with barely controlled fury. "You humiliated me, Sheriff, in front of half the county. Do you have any idea who I am, what I can do to you?" "I have a pretty good idea," Miller said calmly. "You're a man who assaulted his wife, and as for what you can do to me, go ahead and try. My conscience is clear." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Richard spoke again, his voice different now, quieter, almost uncertain. "She's really not coming back, is she?" "That's between you and her," Miller said. "But if I were you, I'd give her some space. Let her figure out what she wants, and maybe take a long look in the mirror while you're at it." "I loved her," Richard said, and for the first time he sounded genuine. "I know you probably don't believe that, but I did. I do." "Love isn't supposed to leave, Burns," Miller said. "You want her back, prove you can change, get help, talk to someone, but don't expect her to stick around while you figure it out. She's done her time." Another silence, then the line went dead. Richard had hung up. Miller set the receiver back in its cradle and rubbed his eyes. He was tired, bone-deep tired, the kind of tired that sleep wouldn't fix. But there was still work to do. He spent the afternoon doing the unglamorous parts of the job, processing speeding tickets, reviewing patrol schedules, checking in with the deputies on their rounds. At 4 o'clock, he got a call from Jeline at the Paradise. "Sheriff, just wanted you to know, Linda's still here. Pastor Williams came by, picked her up. She's going to stay at the church for a few days." "Good," Miller said. "That's good. Thanks for looking after her, Jeline." "Wasn't nothing," Jeline said gruffly. "Girl needed help. We help each other around here. That's how it works." She paused. "You did good today, Tom, real good." After she hung up, Miller sat for a while in the quiet office, watching the light fade from the windows. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. Another day in Mercer County, coming to a close. At 6 o'clock, he locked up the office and drove home. His house was a small ranch on the edge of town, nothing fancy, just a place to sleep and keep his things. He made himself a sandwich, ate it standing at the kitchen counter, and then sat in his recliner with a book he'd been trying to finish for 3 months. But he couldn't concentrate. His mind kept drifting back to Linda Hargrove, to the way she'd looked with coffee dripping from her hair, to the quiet dignity in her voice when she'd said, "I'm not coming back." He thought about all the other women in the county who were living the same nightmare. How many of them would find the courage to leave? How many would stay, believing the lies their husbands told them, the promises that this time would be different? Miller looked at Richard. "Mrs. Hargrove is going to need a place to stay tonight, maybe longer. I want you to call Pastor Williams at First Methodist, see if the church has a room available. If not, try the women's shelter over in Clayton. She shouldn't go back to that house alone." Richard's face crumpled. "You can't, she's my wife, you can't keep her from." "I'm not keeping her from anything," Miller said. "I'm offering her a choice, something I suspect she hasn't had in a long time." He nodded to Reese. "Book him." Reese led Richard away, down the hallway toward the cells. His protests echoed off the cinderblock walls, getting fainter and fainter, until a door slammed and cut them off completely. Miller walked to his office, a small room with a metal desk, a filing cabinet, and a window that looked out onto Main Street. He sat down heavily in the chair, it creaked under his weight, and pulled out the notebook from his breast pocket. He started writing the report, filling in the details, the times, the witness names. His handwriting was slower now, the letters less precise. His hands ached from where he'd gripped the steering wheel. Through the window, he could see Mercer's main drag. The hardware store, the barber shop with the rotating pole, the movie theater showing Dirty Harry for the 3rd week in a row. He could see people going about their lives, picking up groceries, getting their mail, stopping to chat on the sidewalk. Normal life. The kind of life that only worked because men like him stood between the decent people and the wolves. He finished the report, filed it in the cabinet, and locked the drawer. Then he sat back in his chair and closed his eyes for just a moment, letting the exhaustion wash over him. The phone on his desk rang. He picked it up on the second ring. Sheriff Miller. Tom, it's Doc Patterson. The old physician's voice was warm, reassuring, the same voice that had delivered half the babies in the county and sat with the dying when their time came. I just left the Paradise. Checked on Mrs. Hargrove. She's got some minor burns, first degree, nothing serious. But I'm worried about her mental state. How so? She's in shock, I think. Keeps saying she should have stopped him, should have known better. Classic trauma response. A pause. I gave her the number for the crisis center in St. Louis, told her about the support group that meets at the library on Tuesdays. But Tom, she's going to need more than that. She's going to need a lawyer, a divorce lawyer. Miller nodded, even though Patterson couldn't see him. I'll make some calls. Jerry Whitman over in Clayton does family law. Good man, he'll take care of her. Good, good, Patterson sighed. You did right today, Tom. Not everyone would have had the guts. Just doing my job, Doc. No, Patterson said firmly. You did more than your job. You gave that woman her dignity back. After he hung up, Miller sat in the quiet office for a long time, listening to the fan rattle and the distant sound of traffic on Main Street. He thought about Linda Hargrove, sitting in that diner booth with coffee dripping from her hair. He thought about Eddie Kowalski, bleeding out in the Korean snow. He thought about all the ways the world tried to break people, and all the small, stubborn ways some people refused to stay broken. Then he stood, straightened his uniform, and walked back out into the heat of the day. There was always more work to do. 6 months later, on a cold February morning, Sheriff Miller sat in the same booth at the Paradise Diner, working through the same stack of buckwheat pancakes, reading the same county reports. Jolene brought him coffee without asking, black, no sugar, and he nodded his thanks. The door opened, letting in a blast of winter air, and Linda Hargrove walked in. Except she wasn't Linda Hargrove anymore. The divorce had gone through in December. She'd taken back her maiden name, Linda Morrison, and moved into a small apartment above the hardware store. She'd gotten a job at the county clerk's office, filing paperwork and answering phones. Nothing glamorous, but it was hers. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, cut in a practical bob. She wore slacks and a sweater instead of the careful dresses she used to wear. But the biggest change was in her eyes. They were clear now, focused. She looked like someone who'd walked through fire and come out the other side knowing she could survive anything. She saw Miller and smiled, a small, genuine smile, and raised her hand in a wave. Miller nodded back, tipped an imaginary hat. Then she went to the counter, ordered coffee and toast, and sat down to read the morning paper. Just another Thursday in Mercer County. Just another soul finding their way back to solid ground. Miller took another bite of pancakes and looked out the window at the snow falling softly on Main Street, covering everything in clean white silence, and he thought, this is why I do it. This right here. Not for the badge, not for the paycheck, not for the glory. There wasn't any glory in small-town law enforcement, just long hours and hard choices and the weight of other people's pain. He did it for moments like this. For the knowledge that sometimes, just sometimes, you could tip the scales back toward justice. You could stand between the victim and the villain and say, not today, not in my county, not while I'm still breathing. Outside, the world kept turning, cold and hard and often cruel. But inside the Paradise Diner, in this one small corner of Missouri, there was warmth and coffee, and the simple, profound comfort of knowing that someone was watching over you. That when the monsters came, there was a man with a badge and a worn toothbrush and an unshakable belief in doing what was right. Sheriff Tom Miller finished his breakfast, left exact change on the table, and walked out into the snow to begin another day of keeping the wolves at bay. Because that's what he did. That's what he'd always done. And God willing, that's what he'd keep doing until the day they laid him in the ground. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out. In the 1970s, help was hard to find, but today, you don't have to face it alone. Available resources and support are out there 24/7. Remember, real strength isn't found in hurting those weaker than you. It's found in standing up for them, even when it's hard, even when it costs you something. Especially then. Stay vigilant, stay strong, and never let a bully tell you you're powerless. Because you're not.